The young man beamed, announcing that his finest work was complete. He seemed genuinely proud of what he had just finished. With a flourish and a ta-da, he revealed an elaborate magic circle drawn on a large sheet of paper. In his thoughts, he acknowledged this as something called the Chinibu phase, something he considered incredibly cool. However, such childish excitement and foolhardy actions often become the parts of one's past that people most want to forget. But it was precisely this kind of attitude that led to encounters he could never have imagined. An ethereal and mysterious figure emerged from the circle, surprising the boy. The young man was visibly perplexed. Something had indeed appeared, and the situation was unexpected. The kid's mind was racing. He'd only meant to do something he thought was cool, like any middle schooler would, but now he had to figure out if the being before him was friendly or hostile. This situation looked seriously bad. Turning to face him, the girl stared him down with a dark, intense gaze. In a low voice, she questioned his very nature, as if she had never encountered one of his kind before. Ignoring him for a moment, she turned and began sniffing the air near his computer monitor, curiously investigating the new environment before confirming to herself that he was, in fact, human. Suddenly, her entire intimidating demeanor completely shattered. Her eyes welled up as tears streamed down her face, her questioning of him now a vulnerable whisper. Caught completely off guard by the sudden shift, the boy freaked out. The sight of her crying left him speechless and flustered, wearing the classic look of someone who has no idea how to handle a crying girl. Pushing past his initial panic, the young man hesitantly managed to ask if she was okay. The simple act of concern seemed to startle her mid-sob. Still sniffling, she looked up at him with wide, tearful eyes, realizing he was a good person. In a shaky voice, she confessed that this was the very first time a human had ever been nice to her. A heavy, awkward pause filled the room after her stunning admission. Neither of them knew what to say next. Trying to cut through the silence and make sense of the bizarre situation, the boy asked the most fundamental question he could think of. Who, exactly, was she? His question seemed to catch her completely off guard. She blinked in confusion for a moment before the realization hit her with a jolt, making it clear that the answer to that question wasn't simple at all. Pulling herself together, she struck a proud pose and introduced herself. She declared her name to be Mernvidum Kas Mutaphilia, and that for various reasons she had been sealed away for 3,000 years. With a manic glint in her eye, she continued her grand introduction, revealing that she was an evil dragon, and thanks to him, she was now finally free. The boy processed this information quietly. An evil dragon. He then carefully asked the next logical question, wondering if this meant she was actually dangerous. With a wide grin and a cheerful laugh, she happily confirmed that yes, she was super dangerous, seeming incredibly proud of the fact. The kid's reaction was immediate and extreme. He dropped to the floor and started begging for his life, which left the self-proclaimed evil dragon completely bewildered, with no idea what was wrong. In a flustered panic, the boy tried to explain himself, stammering that he didn't actually mean to summon anything. The revelation that her grand moment of freedom wasn't even intentional left her completely floored. Getting up, she pointed at the drawing on the floor, refusing to believe him. She insisted that this was no mere doodle, but an expertly crafted summoning circle. The kid confessed that the circle was just something he drew while being an edgelord, insisting her presence was a total accident. She fell silent, processing the anticlimactic truth. Trying to resolve the mess, he apologized to Miss Evil Dragon and awkwardly suggested that since it was all a mistake, she could just go back. She stared at him, asking for confirmation that he had summoned her by mistake. Her response was a crushing blow to his plan. She sank to the floor, looking small and defeated, and in a weak voice revealed that just going back wasn't an option. The very idea of returning sent a wave of pure terror through her. Her face twisted in panic as she screamed, making it clear that going back to her confinement was her greatest fear. She latched onto him, crying and begging not to go back now that she had finally managed to get free. Seeing her anguish, the boy was taken aback, realizing he had just said something incredibly mean. In her mind, she recalled the darkness and crushing loneliness of her imprisonment. After being sealed away for so long, his accidental spell was what had finally saved her. Still clinging to him, she wept with profound relief, confessing how overjoyed she was to at long last be able to meet a human again. For the first time in his 14 years of life, he witnessed someone cry and beg with such raw desperation. Faced with the sobbing girl, he found he just couldn't tell her to leave and accepted his new reality, telling her that she didn't have to go back. With eyes full of relieved tears, she looked up at him, hardly daring to believe his kindness. She hugged him, acknowledging that he was a genuinely good person. Suddenly, her entire mood shifted from sorrow to pure excitement. With a beaming smile, she announced that as a reward for summoning her, she could grant him a wish. Caught off guard, the kid said he'd need some time to think of a wish. With total confidence, she told him to just leave it to her, as she had a way of figuring it out. Her expression turned serious and focused. Placing a hand on him, she revealed her special ability. She could listen directly to a person's soul to find their truest desire. As she did, she didn't find a simple wish. Instead, she was met with an overwhelming vision from deep within his soul. A massive, shadowy, dragon-like entity towering over the boy's small, solitary figure. The boy was completely disoriented, unable to understand the psychic force engulfing him as she dove into his mind. All he could do was brace himself against the overwhelming experience. Within that vision, the girl explained that the draconic entity he was witnessing was actually a projection of her own true, immense form. In the mindscape, her dragon form cornered the boy's inner self. With an imposing presence, she asked him again, this time with more intensity, what his wish was. In the real world, the boy gasped for breath, feeling the strain of her mind on his. All the while, the dragon in his soul pressed him, questioning if he desired power or riches. This pressure caused his life to flash before his eyes. They weren't happy memories, but flashes of being bullied, sitting alone at school, and feeling a deep-seated hatred for everyone, revealing the painful source of what he might truly want. Finally, amidst the storm in his own soul, the boy found his true answer. Ignoring the offers of power and riches, he admitted that the one thing he really wanted was a friend. He explained to the dragon figure that he didn't need anything grand. He just wanted someone to have fun with, to laugh with, to mess around with, and who would help him through the tough times. With a look of pure anguish, he revealed the root of his desire, the painful truth he could barely admit to himself, that he had always been so alone. Suddenly, the psychic link shattered, and the two were back in reality, standing in his room. They faced each other in a heavy, awkward silence, both reeling from the intensity of what had just transpired. She was the one who broke the silence. With tears of genuine empathy streaming down her face, she pointed at him and declared with overwhelming emotion that she totally understood how he felt, forging a deep bond between the two lonely souls. With an overwhelming passion, she explained exactly why she understood him. She vented about how much it sucks being alone and how, after 3,000 years of trying, she was just about to give up until he came along, leaving him stunned by her intensity. Gently, but with a firm resolve, she took his hands in hers. In that moment, she made a silent, powerful promise that she was going to grant the wish he held in his soul. Looking him right in the eye, she declared with unshakable conviction that she would grant that wish. She was going to make it happen. Then, with a vulnerability that defied her power, she offered the simplest, most heartfelt solution. Her face still stained with tears, she offered to be the friend he always wanted. As her tail wagged with excitement, she insisted that this was the only and best way to grant his wish. It finally clicked for the boy, and the simple idea of just being friends with each other began to sink in. Realizing he couldn't possibly refuse such a heartfelt offer, the boy stammered out his acceptance. Upon hearing a shy, "Pleased to meet you," the girl erupted in a celebration of pure joy. And so, Kuruma Yudo, A 14-year-old Shinibu who had always lived in solitude watched with a strange smile as his new, boisterous friend celebrated the moment. Filled with an infectious happiness, she marveled at the simplest new things, like the softness of a couch. She could hardly contain her excitement over having made her very first friend. Her exploration of the new world continued chaotically. After 15 minutes of noise, Yudo found her bouncing excitedly on top of the toilet. He decided it was time to intervene and try to talk. The instant he called out to her, she panicked and snapped into an exaggerated, formal bow of apology. She tried to explain that her strange behavior wasn't malicious, but the result of extreme nervousness for being free for the first time in 3,000 years. As she bowed, Mernvidum's mind raced with panic. She could feel the concern in his gaze and didn't understand it, wondering what terrible mistake she'd made to earn such a caring look. In her desperation, she hoped that he wouldn't hate her. Then a thought occurred to her. Maybe he wasn't judging her, but instead had the exact same social anxieties that she did. Yudo calmly reassured her, explaining that he wasn't angry or making fun of her at all. Relieved but still confused by his kindness, she found herself questioning if he was truly an evil dragon. Changing the subject to something more normal, she asked him for his name. Caught off guard by the simple question, he answered, introducing himself as Kuroma Yudo. Her reaction to hearing his name was, as usual, over the top. She lit up, repeating his name with an excessive energy that showcased just how excited and socially awkward she truly was. Grabbing his sleeve, she made a vow with overwhelming intensity, swearing she would never forget his name even if her body were to break. The weight of her words made him deeply uncomfortable. The tables turned when he sheepishly had to admit that he'd already forgotten her long, complicated name. The revelation left her completely shocked and crestfallen. Recovering, she conceded with a strained smile that her name was, in fact, long, hard to pronounce, and difficult to remember, looking quite embarrassed about it. She then revealed why she was so sensitive about it. For dragons, a name is tied to their very soul and destiny. She confessed that deep down, she didn't like her own name, finding that it sounded weak. Then, to solve the problem and grow closer to him, she offered a simple solution. She turned to him and suggested that instead of her full name, he could just call her Mumu. However, in a moment of vulnerability, she shyly confessed her deeper wish. Despite offering a nickname, what she truly wanted was for him to call her by her real, grand name. The sudden reversal left him confused. He questioned her, surprised by her contradictory request. He held her by the shoulders, pressing for confirmation that she was really talking about her full, complicated name. With a nervous but hopeful look, she affirmed that she was. Unexpectedly, her sincerity triggered Yudo's Chinibu side. Instead of balking, his eyes lit up with admiration. He grabbed her, exclaiming how incredibly cool and stylish her real name sounded to him. He then burst with excitement, praising her name as perfectly stylish, simple, and elegant. With an overwhelming passion, he declared that he absolutely loved it, revealing that the very thing she was insecure about was exactly the kind of thing his quirky personality admired most. He continued his passionate rant, comparing her lore to that of the gods and gushing about how cool dragons were. His nerdy enthusiasm left her completely speechless. Completely flushed and overwhelmed by his intensity, she timidly asked if he actually liked her name. He confirmed it with a simple, firm yes. Hearing this, her happiness burst forth. With a laugh of pure relief and joy, her tail began to wag uncontrollably. Beaming with happiness, she found herself thinking how handsome he looked in that moment. It was the first time in her long life anyone had ever praised her name, and it felt amazing. Watching her face light up with joy, Yudo had a sudden realization. He noticed that she wasn't just cute, but possessed an almost perfect, inhuman beauty, an observation that immediately made the reclusive boy nervous and start to sweat. Still ecstatic, she begged him to say her real name one more time, which only made the flustered Yudo even more embarrassed and apologetic for his own reaction. Seeing how nervous he was, Mumu spiraled into her own panic mode, wondering if 3,000 years of isolation had made her terrible at socializing. She revealed she'd even practiced conversations with a magic hat, determined not to give up. In an attempt to connect with him, she tried a new conversational tactic, actively looking to find some common ground between them. She pointed to her single horn, suggesting it as something they had in common after he mentioned a failed attempt at wearing an earring. However, when he asked why she only had one horn, she proudly proclaimed that she had broken it off herself and given it to some human children. An explanation so bizarre it only served to baffle Yudo even more. With a sly smile, she continued, hinting that her horn wasn't the only thing she'd offered up, as the materials from her dragon body are apparently indispensable. Yudo was appalled by her foolishness. He reflected on how she was sealed by humans for her power, yet she naively gave parts of herself away. He found her story disturbing, while she seemed to find it amusing. Driven by a sudden, unexplainable impulse, he found himself reaching out towards her remaining horn. Startled, she looked up at him as his hand drew near. He gently took hold of her horn. It was an unexpectedly intimate and tender moment that caught her off guard, causing her to blush under his careful touch. Suddenly, tears began streaming down Yudo's face. A confused Mumu asked what was wrong, but he could only sob. He admitted that he didn't know why he was crying or what he was doing, only that he felt an overwhelming compulsion to hold her horn. As he wept for her, Mumu verbalized the pain he was feeling. She said that anyone would come to hate humans after enduring such painful experiences, on top of being sealed away. His empathy triggered her own suppressed feelings. With a sad, tearful smile, she began to cry as well, overwhelmed by the shared emotion and the memories of her past. In a gesture of pure comfort, Yudo pulled her into a hug. Nestled against his shoulder, she made a profound confession that despite everything she had suffered, she still truly loved humans. After her confession, they stood in silence for a moment. She then thanked him, saying that this moment of catharsis was because of him, leaving him slightly confused by her gratitude. The emotional storm had passed. Mumu looked up at him, not with sadness, but with a radiant smile of pure, innocent happiness, solidifying the deep bond that had just formed between the two lonely souls. After the emotional storm, Mumu clung to Yudo, simply enjoying the warmth of another person after 3,000 years of cold. The flustered boy asked if she could maybe let go. Later, in an attempt to return to normalcy, Yudo told her he needed to pop out for some shopping for a bit, and asked if she would be okay watching the house by herself. His question was met with a blank, confused stare. She didn't seem to comprehend what such a mundane request meant. Then, her expression shifted dramatically. Her eyes darkened with a frightening intensity, and she confronted him with a dreadful question, interpreting his simple request in the worst way imaginable. Her dark accusation turned to heartbroken betrayal. She couldn't believe he would abandon her, tearfully reminding him that he had just promised to be her friend. Yudo was completely lost. He couldn't understand how the situation had deteriorated so quickly, questioning why she was so upset when they had just been connecting and getting along so well. Her face twisted in pain. She accused him, asking if he really intended to make her go through the agony of loneliness all over again after everything she'd told him. He tried to reason with her, asking if she really thought he was so cruel as to give her a glimmer of hope just to snatch it away. To her, however, the prospect of being left alone was the cruelest thing imaginable. When he tried to leave, she clung desperately to his leg, refusing to let go. His attempts to reassure her that he'd be right back were met with a scream of refusal. Clinging to him, she begged him not to throw her away, convinced he was lying. In a fit of frustration, Yudo yelled back, exasperated at how it had come to this, and tired of being tricked by false hope himself. The source of her panic became clear in a flashback to her traumatic past. She remembered how armies had come to exterminate her, and how those she invited into her home betrayed her, looting all her treasures and leaving her lair in ruins. Understanding the depth of her trauma, Yudo's frustration melted into empathy. He realized that because of her dark past, he truly couldn't leave her alone. In response, she suggested the obvious solution, that they go together. And so, they set off, with Mumu now clinging to his arm, not out of fear, but out of happy, trusting companionship. With a sigh of resignation, he checked to see if she was feeling all right. Despite her insistence that she was fine, it was obvious the emotional roller coaster had taken its toll. She looked pale and was clearly not feeling well at all. Suddenly, to Yudo's absolute horror, she became violently ill. But instead of anything normal, she threw up a literal waterfall of liquid that shimmered with all the colors of the rainbow. Despite her insistence that she was fine, it was obvious the emotional roller coaster had taken its toll. She looked pale, her body twitching as she fought back whatever was coming. Suddenly, to Yudo's absolute horror, she became violently ill. But instead of anything normal, she threw up a literal waterfall of liquid that shimmered with every color of the rainbow. As he stared in disbelief at the sparkling puddle on the floor, an incredibly embarrassed Mumu apologized. She tried to explain that it was mostly just excess magic energy and not a big deal. In that moment, everything clicked for Yudo. Her sickness wasn't just from the excitement. He realized she was genuinely terrified of seeing how much the world had changed after her 3,000 years of isolation. With a newfound understanding and empathy, he placed a hand on her shoulder. He told her he understood that she was scared to go out, and that he would go alone instead, promising to be back as fast as he could and asking her to watch the house. Touched by his understanding, Mumu reflected for a moment. She realized that, even though she was scared, having a friend by her side made her feel like she could actually face her fears. With this newfound courage, she turned to the exhausted Yudo and shyly asked him to lend her his strength, not as a power, but as a support. Her earnest request reinvigorated him. With a gentle smile, he extended his hand to her and agreed, suggesting that they should try to face the world together. Remembering that they were friends now, her face lit up with a radiant, genuine smile, full of the happiness and courage their friendship gave her. And so, the two of them stepped out into the world. Hand in hand, the dragon girl who feared the world and the reclusive boy who hid from it took their first steps together under the open sky, ready to face whatever came next. Stepping outside, Mumu was in awe of the tranquil surroundings. The sound of crickets and the peaceful landscape were a stark contrast to the chaotic world she remembered. While Yudo stood by awkwardly, unsure of what to say, Mumu's attention was captured by the smallest of things. She marveled at the simple life of an ant, something she hadn't seen in millennia. She crouched in the grass, fascinated by the wildlife around her. Every tiny insect and blade of grass was a source of wonder for someone who had been locked in darkness for so long. Watching her, Yudo reflected on how different his world was. The peace he took for granted was completely alien to the world of war and betrayal she had described. However, a troubling memory clouded his thoughts. He recalled a dark fact from his own world's history, that this peaceful era only came after it had once been on the very brink of total destruction itself. Despite the peaceful mood, Yudo decided to tell her. He revealed the historical fact that the world they stood in had, at some point in the distant past, been on the brink of total annihilation. Seeing her reaction, he immediately regretted it. He clumsily tried to downplay his statement, suggesting it was probably just a natural disaster and had nothing to do with her. But his words were too late. Mumu's face crumpled with an overwhelming sadness, her eyes filling with tears as if her heart were breaking all over again. She became convinced that it was no coincidence. In her mind, there was no way she could be 100% blameless for the world's near destruction, and the thought that it might have been better if she'd stayed sealed came rushing back. As she drowned in guilt, Yudo panicked, apologizing profusely for ever bringing it up. He knew he had made a terrible mistake. In a clumsy attempt to fix his mistake, Yudo started patting Mumu on the head. He apologized over and over, lamenting his own insensitivity as he tried to comfort her. The simple, gentle gesture caught her by surprise. She looked up at him, her eyes still filled with tears, as the act of pure comfort began to soothe her distraught soul. As if by magic, her sadness instantly dissipated. Her energy and happiness were fully restored. Like his kindness was a healing spell that completely cured her of her despair. Later, sitting peacefully in the grass, she looked at him with admiration. She marveled at the fact that he was someone who would feel her hardship so deeply that he would cry for her. Her sincere praise left him completely flustered, embarrassed, and unable to handle her genuine admiration. He looked away. Once again, the reclusive boy caught off guard by honest emotion. With a smile of pure bliss, Mumu made her deepest confession. She explained that being saved was so meaningful to her because the person who became her friend was specifically him. Her words hit him with a force he didn't expect. He stood in shock as he realized the depth of her feelings, that this new world was precious to her simply because it was the one where she met him. His heart pounding in his chest, he became completely flustered, overwhelmed by the sincerity and power of her emotions. Gathering his composure, he finally circled back to his original plan. He suggested that with everything settled, it was time to go shopping, and this time, Mumu met the idea with cheerful determination. Filled with a new confidence born from their friendship, she saw him to the door. With a radiant smile, the dragon girl who once feared abandonment now confidently assured him that she would be fine and would take good care of the house. Her sudden confidence caught him completely by surprise. He couldn't help but worry that she was pushing herself too hard, putting on a brave face after such an emotionally draining day. At the very last second, however, her bravery faltered. Just as he closed the door, she frantically yelled for him to hurry back, threatening that she might cry if he was late. He was left standing outside, utterly bewildered by her sudden reversal, before finally heading off on his errand.